When you know something important is happening, you want to be in there, to be part of it. At FT Live events, new ideas and valuable insights are shared by the world's leading minds. Online and in person. Make sure you're there with them to shape the agenda and get the bigger picture. With the right people in the right place at the right time.
What's the price to ship your cargo? Assess fair market rates for every possible clean route with Vortex's Anywhere Freight pricing. Choose your vessel class, origin and destination ports to access pricing on demand for all 50,000 active routes and more. Compare multiple routes to evaluate trade profitability, using historical data to identify seasonal patterns and price trends. Instant, unlimited, Anywhere Freight pricing.
Wanted to connect. I just wanted to.
Insight cuts through the noise with expert market calls and actionable intelligence that traders and strategists trust. On January 10th, the US government expanded its sanctions to include a wide range of entities and assets tied to the Russian energy trade. Kepler's Insight team closely monitored this major shift in the oil and gas markets, delivering a series of detailed analyses and updates over the following weeks. Using Kepler's proprietary data and in-house expertise, the Insight team offers clients a unique, objective perspective on market changes and their influence on pricing trends. Kepler Insight, finding the signal in the noise.
I think it's really important to have these type of discussions where you bring different perspectives, whether it's African policymakers, private sector, international organization, investors. It kind of brings us together to really think deep and find solutions on how do we go forward.
Well, I think it's a very important set of people that come together because it's both political representatives, it's representatives from the media sector, but it's also business networks, think tanks that come together in these conversations, confronting the issues that we deal with in Africa.
We have challenges in Africa. I mean, we discussed what needed to be done to achieve our growth. Cost of capital, unfortunately, affecting investments and investment decisions. That's something that needs to be addressed. Better skills for our young people, technical skills are also needed.
I think that if you want to talk about Africa and learn what's happening, this would be a great place to be. An event like this is bringing together government leaders, industry, bringing together all sorts of people that are investing in multiple sectors. I don't know why you wouldn't want to be here.
Back, everyone. Thank you for taking your seats promptly and silently. I like an obedient audience. We're going to dive in, having heard about critical minerals, electrification, and energy transition this morning. We're going to take up our annual look at the LNG natural gas market outlook in a new drill, baby, drill era. And I'm pleased to say we've got a global panel with a variety of different perspectives. Frédéric Barneau from CEFA, Marco Salfranc from Expo, Amy Papia from 61 Commodities, and Anne-Sophie Corbeau from Columbia University, moderated by the excellent Jamie Smith. Please welcome them.
Good morning and welcome to our panel. I'm the US Energy Editor of the FT, which means I've basically got the task of trying to make sense of Donald Trump's plan to unleash LNG and achieve energy dominance. So we're going to see how that's going to go over the next few years. But let's turn to my panel here. And maybe we'll get started with an assessment of the current state of the gas market in Europe. So Marco, we saw gas prices surge earlier this year due to cold weather, low wind speeds, and the halting of Russian pipeline gas through Ukraine. Do you expect this tightness to persist, or is it likely that we see a return to pre-war price levels soon?
So before answering this question, let me mention two aspects about Europe. The first one, an obvious one, Europe depends heavily on LNG. In the last years, since 2022, Europe imported between 110 to 150 BCM of LNG, 50 more than before the war. And the second aspect, which is also very important, Europe lost a lot of flexibility in the last year, not only due to the war. First, on the demand side, there was, due to the energy transition, Europe decommissioned about 60 to 70,000 megawatt of coal-fired power plants. So Europe, it's no more so easy to switch from gas to coal and back to gas. On the supply side, also if we are looking at the domestic production in Europe, there is a continuous reduction of the domestic production of 2%, but Europe lost also Groningen, 50 BCM, and clearly the supply coming from Russia. Also this allowed Europe to have a certain flexibility. And then the storage, so clearly it's more difficult to store gas in Ukraine. Say that Europe has no buffer anymore, so when Europe needs gas, needs LNG, and the market has then to react in price and to attract this LNG. And this is the main reason we see this high volatility at the moment in the market, also headline driven, unfortunately, because LNG is a global commodity. And coming back to the question, yes, so at least we expect that this tightness will persist until we see new LNG in the market, until new liquefaction terminals are in place. Fortunately, there are a lot of projects, especially now in the US. We see 50 MTPA for 25, 60, 20, 26, up to 80, 90, 27. There will be, for certain, a certain delay on this project, but there are a lot of terminals, liquefaction terminals, starting operation, and this will reduce for sure the tightness.
Frederick, can you talk a little bit about CEFE, who you are, and also that question on what you're seeing in terms of pricing in Europe?
Yeah, I mean, CEFE is owned by the Federal Republic of Germany. It's one of the major merchant business in gas and power across Europe, globally on LNG, and also very heavy on gas, but also in the future hydrogen infrastructure, pipeline and storage. I guess the way we see the gas market these days is a bit like Marco said, it's tight. There is a path towards the winter and the rest of it, but it's going to be tight and with a lot of headlines which are not always constructive for bringing serenity in prices. And yes, Europe has to attract the LNG. It has done so quite successfully, but that has a price, and I guess the objective that we have is both ensuring security of supply, not just now, but for the future, but also making sure that we provide a framework where we can moderate prices so as to sustain demand, so that we have happy customers and happy voters as well in the end. So definitely trying to work on that, and I can say a little bit more there later on.
And Sophie?
Very simply, I mean, European gas storage are at a much lower level than they were over the past 2 years. And that means that during the summer, we need to import more. The only source of additional supply is LNG. And on top of that, we have lost 15 billion cubic meters of Russian gas transiting through Ukraine. So this is making, the whole import formula a lot more complicated than it was before. But should prices have gone to 58 euro per megawatt hour? I don't think so. I think, there were some people who were positioning themselves and playing a little bit with the market.
Yeah. Amy, I want to do a little pivot here. What are the demand forecasts for Asian nations looking like, and how is that impacting European pricing?
So I would say that the Asian demand story from a structural perspective remains intact. We just haven't tested it recently because we have been pricing to contract demand as far as possible, that due to the European story that we've just heard. But the drivers across the region, from South Asia, Southeast Asia to the Far East, are similar to what they have always been. A combination of declining domestic production, increased use of gas in the power sector, coal retirements, delays to nuclear restarts, increased grid connectivity, the list goes on, and across the region there has been a significant infrastructure build-out in order to support that story. But this demand is only going to come to market in tranches as prices correct with this additional supply that has been mentioned from the sort of next wave of LNG projects. And I think that we will need to see correction not only in an absolute sense, but also in relation to the prices of other fuels. As we see more supply, we also may see a shift in the kind of demand-pull dynamic that we're in now, where we need to compete, to a more supply-push kind of dynamic. And there are many scenarios in which you will need to test flexible markets such as China to see how much exactly they can absorb. You know, China and Europe have had this kind of complementary relationship where China has been the balancing factor for when Europe has needed more or less cargoes. And I think as long as that relationship exists and Europe remains very exposed to the LNG spot market, the European gas and LNG markets will remain highly correlated.
And I think we need to be particularly careful at China this year, because what I see already is that the Chinese LNG imports are declining. And we may actually have a repeat of the story of 2022, when actually among the 50 billion cubic meters that we got in Europe, about 20 BCM was coming from China. So we were lucky with the zero COVID policy. And it's not completely impossible that we get something like that again this year, which would be really great for us. You know, weaker economic growth in China, the fact that maybe there is not that much of appetite on US LNG, on spot LNG in general, maybe Xi Jinping pushing Sinopec, Sinox, CNPC to increase domestic gas production. And of course, Power of Siberia is at capacity. So there is going to be an 8 BCM of additional Russian pipeline gas coming to China. But let's cross the fingers that, you know, this story is actually moving to help Europe.
If I may, so if we are looking really in the details on China, they heavily invested in domestic production, heavily, and also on pipe gas, Power of Siberia, but also on storage. So they have, they were 3-4 years ago at 20 BCM, now they are at 50. 2030 they will be at 90 BCM. So the market of China is really changing. And we see this demand, this yearly demand is changing seasonally. So going more from the winter, or flattening more, so going from the winter to the summer. So, and again, adding a lot of flexibility, as you were saying.
Yeah, the exact opposite of Europe in a way, as Marco mentioned, losing flexibility against gaining flexibility.
And interestingly, that increase in pipeline gas from Russia to China. And I wanted to ask that now, because, you know, we've got these peace talks going on between Ukraine and Russia. We could potentially get sanctions relief if we do get peace. You know, what does that mean for the Russian pipeline flows into Europe? Are we going to get those resuming? And what impact does that have on LNG?
Well, I mean, first of all, let's understand why we have some people, especially in Europe, who are saying, well, we need to have Russian pipeline gas coming back. That's very simple. I mean, 2025 is going to be tight. European industrials are screaming that they are going to die, and they want gas prices to be lower. And we know what is going to happen on the LNG side. There is not going to be an additional, say, 10, 20 billion cubic meters of additional LNG supply coming from heaven and landing on the global supply balance. The only source of spare gas capacity is Russia. Whether you are looking at the sanctioned Arctic LNG 2 train, which is operational, has started operating last year, or Russian pipeline gas. We have written quite a bit on that with my colleague Tatiana, and I mean, we have always said between US and Russia, sanctions have to be on the menu of negotiations. They have to be because Russia wants it. Now, what exactly is going to happen? So there is, you know, the oil side, there is the gas side, and I want to make a distinction between Arctic LNG 2, which is really strategic for Putin, and the Russian pipeline gas. Our assumption was that maybe the transit through Ukraine could actually resume, because it's not big volumes. It will make some European leaders, especially on the eastern side of Europe, happy. It will lower the gas prices, so European industrials are happy. It's not too much, so it's not completely, removing the interest from the US side. But let's be honest, the more Russian gas is coming back, the more you are actually removing market from US LNG. And that's why, Trump has to decide exactly how to make everybody happy. And this is a tough one. And when I see people, saying we are going to restart Nord Stream 2, then I think this is a bit too much. First, we are talking about a much bigger pipeline, which is really politically tainted. It has never been certified. It's a lot of gas. It's the same size as Alaska LNG or Plaquemine 1 and 2. So that one, against which actually Trump has been fighting during his whole first mandate, I have difficulties believing in that one.
Interesting. Frederick?
Yeah, I guess if you take the politics out of it, say how much gas do we need? That's the key question if you look at things economically. Economically, we talked about the sort of short-term balance, and yes, maybe we're already a little bit pricing it that there'll be some outcome of those talks and maybe some gas coming back, but it's not going. The floodgates are not going to open like that. There's a lot of wounded people, a lot of wounded countries, a lot of counterparties that have arbitration that have. So all that will. But in the end, it's an economic matter. And I think one thing what might change is maybe not US LNG versus Russian or Qatari, because there might be a scenario where demand is going strong, not just in Asia, but because we are entering, in our view, into a capex super cycle, which then is driven by obviously defense, but also infrastructure investments. And we've not seen that. We tend to see that either before or after every war. But we've seen that probably 3 or 4 times every century. And the potential of what has been lined up as commitment on capex, which then will play into gas, nuclear, metals, and all the infrastructure build-up, might have the opportunity to say, well, we need all the gas we can, politics aside, because that's the short-term fix to enable this demand, whether for AI or for proper infrastructure. So that's something which somehow we take into consideration for the mid-long-term planning. And in that, obviously, is then what's the switch towards hydrogen or electrification. But this demand pool for energy is there. So how do we address it? And put politics aside. And we always try to put politics aside, even if we are in the middle of it.
If I may, all that said, I think politics aside, it will take time until Russian gas will come back to Europe. So there will be a ceasefire, peace agreements, then all the agreements for transportation of this gas. So it will really take time, and most probably we don't see a lot of volume coming before 26. And also, if we are looking at the volumes, they are not massive in the sense, most probably there will be more flow coming from Ukraine, as was in 24, right? More or less, we'll have more coming from as LNG, Nord Stream 2. This will take a lot of time. We need the authorization of Germany, Denmark, Sweden, Finland. So all of that will take time. So if we see more gas, it will be in 26, most probably in 27. And at least this is our expectation.
And by that time, we will have plenty of LNG coming to the market. Exactly. So maybe we don't need that Russian gas anymore.
What do you think about this plan that Trump has about unleashing US LNG? There's all this string of terminals alongside the Gulf of Mexico or the Gulf of America, depending on how you term it. Are they going to happen? Is there going to be enough money to get those terminals off the ground? Trump's obviously going to provide the permits. He's already permitted quite a few of them. What do you think? Do you think, Amy, that there's a chance they'll go ahead?
So I think that, in recent earnings calls this year and in Sierra Week, there has been a lot of enthusiasm from project developers and optimism around reaching final investment decisions this year. And you're absolutely right, a lot of the regulatory and permitting hurdles have been overcome. But I would say that picture, it's not without its own challenges. A lot of the contracts that were originally signed for these projects were done in 22 and 23, and at much lower price levels. And now as we move into an environment with higher financing costs, higher construction costs, a lot of these contracts are needing to be renegotiated. And in that picture, if you're, say, a Chinese end buyer, or perhaps a portfolio player that already has US LNG, knowing that you can't sell it with flexibility across the region because of the Chinese LNG tariffs, perhaps you're less inclined to engage in that process. You're also not going to see Chinese end buyers likely to sign up to any new contracts, and we have already established that they're one of the key growth markets. And against the sort of picture of rising costs in the US, you do have an environment where oil index contracts and the slopes on those are generally coming down. So there's also the relative competitiveness against other suppliers as well. So I would say it's not a straightforward picture, but certainly some of the hurdles have been lifted.
But basically, the US is the largest LNG exporter, is going to remain the largest LNG exporter based on the capacity which is currently under construction. That is a certainty. If they were to authorize another, say, 40 million tons of LNG, which is like, Alaska LNG and two smaller projects, that would mean that they would be 50% higher than Qatar with its 142 million tons of LNG. So LNG dominance, it's already there. And I think, one of the key assets of US LNG is the flexibility. But that may be undermined if, there is this trade war and you are starting to see some tariffs. So China already, this is the largest LNG importer. It has a lot of growth potential in the future. The relationship with Europe, we should see. But when you're looking at the global LNG picture, so we have, if I exclude Arctic LNG 2 and Mozambique, we have 270 billion cubic meters of LNG capacity, which is coming to the market up to 2030. That's a lot. That's actually more than all the demand in Asia minus Korea and Japan. So that means that Asia minus Korea and Japan needs to double its LNG demand to absorb all this LNG which is coming to the market. Well, there is indeed, the story of all the competition with coal. Usually you have an absence in terms of carbon prices. So you need your LNG to be very competitive. And if suddenly, we're seeing Henry Hub prices moving to 4 and, the LNG, the liquefaction fee being a bit higher, I don't know where that puts us.
I want to ask Frederick here about the contracts as well. Are you renegotiating, and talk to a little bit of that theme?
Yes. Not yes, we are negotiating. Yes, I'll answer. Our mission is to underwrite the energy security of Europe, and in particular Northwest Europe. And that's at the heart of what we do. Whatever the energy, today it's gas, LNG. For that, we've turned to the Middle East. We signed a major deal with ADNOC, and we turned to the US. It's quite simple. For the long term, spot and mid-term, we do plenty of stuff. The US, in a sense, we were somehow frustrated by the pause declared by the previous administration in the context we described. So we are not totally welcoming what's happening in the US in terms of super hype, but it makes sense that some of those projects get back on track. So we are very pleased to be partnering with Venture Global for the CP2 projects. We are the largest off-taker there. I think the non-FTA agreement were approved. So that's one step forward towards FID, I guess, this summer. And that's going to be one of the backbone of supplies towards Europe, in addition to their existing plants. Innovator. So not all US projects are the same. In this case, we have an innovator that is quite ballsy and put on some new and acceleration into developing energy projects. We just announced this morning We signed a non-binding HOA for 15-year contracts, 1.5 million ton with Delphine. Here it's still US, but it's slightly different. Different approval paths. It's MARAD approved that because it's an offshore floating liquefaction, two floating units. We are very comfortable with that. It's the same team that worked on another project we've been the sole off-taker of in Cameroon with Perenco and Golar. So that's another, and it's provide a little diversification, even if it's still US. And then we are quite engaged with Woodside and some of the other players into their own projects, because we believe that the US provides, gas and LNG, and that's a natural way. And in all that, I didn't mention Trump or not Trump. It's just for us as looking at the demand side and saying where does this structural supply can come. The US has a wonderful advantage of providing fully flexible LNG. Therefore, we can handle some of the pace of the energy transition towards non-methane solutions by tackling global markets and those kind of things. So this is an example. But on the other side, it's still starting with an expensive LNG that reached Europe. So we're balancing that with diversification in our portfolio, geographical type of projects, but always keeping flexibility in our books because we think we need to adapt in all scenarios, whether they are dictated from politics or just a natural evolution of the economic forecast.
I think it's very interesting to see that most of these long-term contracts are very flexible, right? Are all more or less FOB with no destination clause, where you can bring the cargoes where you want. Why? Because there is a certain risk, at least for Europe, that with the energy transition we are in, that there is a reduction of the demand. There is still Russian gas, which could become an option. And so all these long-term contracts, which are closed by European player, normally are very flexible. And I think it's very interesting to see.
Yeah, but there is one notable exception to that trend, which is our friends from Qatar, which, actually do not like really that flexibility. And they have done something which is really very unusual in the LNG industry, which is taking FID and then signing the long-term contracts. And over the past 2 years, they have been like, yeah, we are going to have a great year. We are going to sell a lot of LNG, sign a lot of long-term contracts. And in fact, 2024 has been very disappointing in terms of signing new long-term contracts. But on top of that, they have taken FID on another 16 million ton in February last year. So when you're looking at Qatar and you're thinking, so what is going to happen with all your LNG, which is, coming online? What are you going to do? And I don't know. I did a graphic recently on LinkedIn where I put, for Qatar, I put very silent, hopefully on time. Because I don't know. Are the Qataris going to be so upset about the fact that, people are not signing long-term contracts with them? Well, they have been reliable, etc., etc. And that they say, okay, so we are going to only start the liquefaction plants where we have contracts attached, and maybe we have a little bit of, 10%, 15% on top of that for spot. And that's it. You want more LNG? Come to us and sign the long-term contracts. Or else, they go for a bloodbath, and they kill US LNG by running to the bottom.
I think Qatar is also trying to do a bit what we are doing, which is maybe not sell the flexibility, but keep it for themselves. And they've taken a lot of regas positions in Europe, for example. And you can see them well play this east-west, not game, because it's not a game, but arbitrage, as Amy was saying, in terms of demand, flexing demand and supply, where it comes and goes. China one day and Europe the other day. So they have been investing in those tools, asset tools, and now they are putting together the sort of more trading-minded infrastructure so that they can have this flexibility, trying to control it as much as they can. But they are on such a growth as well that they need to find other customers like ourselves and then negotiate some flexibility. Yeah.
If I may, clearly there will be a concentration on US and Qatar, right? But US and Qatar are very different because on Qatar we have Qatar Energy controlling the whole LNG leaving Qatar, right? On the US we have many private investors, and there is also very there is a good competition between these investors, right? And this is also the reason we see much more flexibility coming from the US than from Qatar.
And also the weight between the domestic market and the export is totally different when you are comparing, Qatar, which is 50 billion cubic meters domestic market, and the size of their exports, which is already twice that, and it's going to be even bigger. Well, in the US, yes, the share of exports, LNG export and pipeline export is increasing, but we still have 900 billion cubic meters market, which is actually very interesting because the title of the presentation is Drill, Baby, Drill, and we have not talked too much about that, but I would argue drill, baby, drill is absolutely necessary in the US if you want to meet the additional needs for LNG export. And over the past year, everybody has been talking about AI, data centers, we need more gas, we need more power, blah, 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 blah. No, this is super important because if you are looking at the latest EIA's annual energy outlook from 2023, they didn't put one last year, you see that domestic gas production in the US doesn't increase that much up to 2035. What is basically balancing the higher needs for LNG export is lower gas demand in the power generation. But if we are moving into a world where power demand is much higher, and in a world where basically wind and solar are literally excluded from the definition of energy, if you have not read the National Energy Emergency, look at the bottom, they are excluded. You may think we will need a lot more gas.
I guess even now the IEA is bullish on gas. I mean, that tells a lot, huh?
Yeah, I mean, actually, that's a key issue that we're going to write a lot about. It's, this big demand, this 90 gas-fired power plants rolling out across the US. You got the demand for the AI, revolution, and then you've got the LNG build-out. It's quite a lot. So they better hope that oil and gas prices stay high so you continue to get the drilling.
Yeah, but you want also the gas to be competitive, right? And I am kind of worried because I fear that we may have a repeat of 2022 this year, especially if we get a very hot summer and a very cold winter. And I don't want to see what is going to happen if we have $9-10 per MMBTU next winter. US industrials rushing to the White House, this is completely impossible, we need to restrict export. So who is going to tank, US LNG exports or or pipeline exports to Mexico?
I want to just remind the audience, you've got a chance to ask questions. I'll take one more question here, and then please put up your hand and think about what you want to ask, or you can do it on the iPad. I wanted to switch back a little bit to Europe because I was reading about this new European strategy which has been flagged for gas. We're not quite there yet, but there are ideas that they're coming with. One of them is they're going to potentially phase out Russian gas altogether. Another idea was that they might start investing directly in terminals. Is anyone following that debate and what's happening?
Again, sorry.
Yeah.
The idea to invest into LNG export terminals outside, like potentially in the United States, just to target one country, is coming from the fact that Europe has been observing what has happened with Japan and how the Japanese have historically invested into LNG export terminals, and also the fact that Japan is paying much lower prices than we do. However, I think they have basically come up with the wrong diagnostic. The reason why Japan is paying much lower prices than we do is because most of their contracts are indexed to oil. So if you are, taking into account the slope, etc., this is coming to lower prices than what we are paying, and with a little bit lower volatility as well. Also, memory is short because 10 years ago, everybody was talking about the fact that Japan is paying a premium. Japanese prices were at $14-15 per MMBTU, while we were paying $10 per MMBTU. That's a period 2011-2014. And, that was called the security premium that the Japanese were apparently happy to pay. Now, if we in Europe invest into LNG liquefaction plant, well, first of all, who exactly is investing that? Well, I know they would want to facilitate, the financing. It's a bit strange to want to facilitate the investment in LNG export terminals, which are going to come online towards the end of the decade, where for sure our LNG demand is eventually going to come down. So why would we do that? And if we invest into LNG export terminals in a country which actually doesn't really care at all about methane emissions, and I think we had a methane emission regulation a few months ago. I mean, that would be completely bizarre. Now, you are investing in LNG export terminals, and the country decides, well, you know what, methane emissions, I don't care. So we invest into garbage LNG. That doesn't make any sense to me.
Amy, the Japanese model, what do you think for Europe?
I mean, I agree with Sophie in the sense that, you know, what exactly is Europe trying to achieve in doing that? And actually, you know, some of these concerns could be alleviated by simply signing up to some term contracts in order to reduce the sort of spot market exposure that they have. You know, I think that Europe is very, in the past, used to having fundamental drivers to push and pull to have an immediate volumetric response to a change in price. So coal to gas switching or pipeline nomination flexibility. Having spot market exposure in LNG means that you have certain time lags before you can call or push a volume. So if you're buying a cargo today, chances are that cargo hasn't even loaded yet. And so what that does is creates these big swings in prices where you overshoot in either way. But equally, that could be solved in other ways without having to make these investments.
Yeah. Very nice Qatari LNG, which is not contracted.
Yes.
I want to give a chance to the audience. If anyone's got any questions, put your hands up. Yeah, so I want to ask one here from this. So what about tariffs? What potentially could Trump's tariffs do in terms of disrupting the LNG industry? We've already got tariffs on China and retaliatory tariffs. I don't know, Frederick, what do you think? You're probably looking at this.
Yeah, I mean, when we do 15 or 20 years sort of investments in contracts or in assets, we like to have some stability and some foresight in the regulatory framework or in the tariff framework, in the fact that we can rely on international framework of cooperation and commerce. So the endangering of that is a bit of an issue for us, I guess, because it blurs the way we can handle contract. So nothing specific on tariff, but that doesn't provide enough comfort for investment decisions. And therefore, then we may take a bit more time to assess all scenarios and be a little bit more cautious when deciding that. So that's the immediate effect of having too much uncertainty.
I also feel like at the moment with the Chinese retaliatory tariff, we have been fortunate that there isn't much US LNG going to China anyway, because the arb for Atlantic cargoes to go to the Pacific has largely been closed because of Europeans' demand for LNG. And the second is that the operational element that you need to handle this, we've been blessed by quite a slack shipping market. And so if you have to do some swaps or, you know, have an additional operational headache to solve, it is possible. But as we move forward in time, this may not necessarily be the case with the shipping market as more LNG projects start up and increase demand for tonnage. And also the amount of US LNG coming on the market will increase. You have Chinese contracts that are also due to start up. So there's a lot of complexity that is presently not in the market that has yet to come, I think.
Marco, any thoughts on tariffs? What about April 2nd? That's the big day we're all waiting for.
No, but so I completely agree with what the colleagues were saying, but I think so at the end it's really difficult to because it depends on details, right? Which countries are applying certain tariffs, what the tariffs are, etc. But what we expect, if this will come, is also a change in flow, because we will see more and more swaps of cargoes, and this will impact the flow of cargoes for sure. And At the moment, the freight is very low, so at the moment, swapping cargoes is not a big issue. But it will be very interesting to see if this tariffs, if this war of tariffs will start, because it's not there yet. It's only China now applying tariffs at the moment, and how this will develop in the future.
One issue which we touched on a little bit was environmental legislation in Europe, and I know Biden was pushing quite heavily to track the sort of CO2 content of LNG and the emissions, and now Trump's come in and slashed the methane fee immediately. He's trying to roll back all the environmental regulation in the US gas industry. I'm just wondering, is that going to prompt European buyers to shun some US LNG at some stage, or could it face problems with CBAM and on these other sort of European regulations? Have you thought about that, Frederick?
Yes. Another set of uncertainty in how it will play out. The one thing I can say is when we look at long-term contracts, for example, we do somehow try to price the carbon footprint or content of that and of that plant versus that other one, and provide our board with sort of visibility on which one is the better one. Likewise, when we sort of price out whether it's a 10-year or a 20-year contract, we sort of say, well, the tail, if we have to offset, the methane, and in addition to our own endeavors, how does that look like in terms of offset short and the price of that? But it's difficult to do that because the carbon market are not globally regulated and with unified pricing. But somehow we try to point out those things. In terms of the very short term and CBAM, at this stage we're just working through the process of understanding what would be the consequences. Yeah.
I think right now EU players are trying to understand really the implications of the methane regulation, and we are talking to the different suppliers. And I know also at the political level there are discussions between the European Commission and the US counterpart. But despite the fact that Trump is like, okay, methane regulation, no. I think in the US there are a lot of market players, like companies like EQTs, and I'm sure this applies also to the IOCs, who are like, okay, we need to actually slash methane emissions because this is very important. They understand, the way the market is going, and right now it's only Europe which has a regulation, but Korea and Japan have been, looking at voluntary doing something, so it could evolve. So I would say, the producers, they understand, what is at stake. So we may end up in a bifurcated market where you have the producers who are really doing something and trying to be transparent, and where the Trump fan club who is like, I don't care, methane emissions invisible anyway, so who cares?
Amy, do you want to?
I also would say that right now we're in a seller's market, right? And so, you may have, a few producers that, as Anne-Sophie said, but as we move to a slacker market and more of a buyer's market, you may see others coming on board as well.
Marco, you can have the last word. Because
I can only agree. It's interesting to see an example of ENGIE. In 2020, they wanted to conclude a contract with next decade. And France was opposing, so they didn't do it in 2020, but in 2022, after the war started. So at the end, security of supply is more important, right, than environment topics. This will change for sure, and especially when the market starts to be long again on the LNG side, and clearly then it could well be that we'll have a carbon footprint also on LNG.
Perfect. Thank you so much. We've run out of time. Thanks a million.
Thank you, Jamie, and to the panel. Another insight there into some of the uncertainties that tariffs are creating, this time for natural gas and LNG markets. We are now just lining up our next keynote interview. So again, if you could take your seats rapidly and quietly, and also if you're leaving the room, do so in silence, and we can get the doors closed and welcome our next keynote interview. We've got the great pleasure of hearing from another leader in